And I have the pleasure of speaking today with Allyson McQuinn, a doctor of Heilkunst medicine. Isn't that right, Ally?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you for joining us, Ally. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be able to do this with you.
Yes. Okay, so we're going to get right to the meat of it because there's a lot to cover, and it's such an interesting subject for me because I have a personal experience with it as well. But Ally, tell us a little bit about what is Heilkunst homeopathy and what is the philosophy behind it?
Yes, with pleasure. So Heilkunst is a German word that literally means whole art and science of healing and curing. And so it was a term that was first coined by Dr. Samuel Hahnemann back in the early 1800s. And he basically said that you need to utilize natural law, like cures like, to homeopathically address chronic disease without causing any harm.
Aha. Okay. So the way that I think of actually about homeopathy is it's almost like a vaccine. So like yours, like it's the premise of a vaccine, but really without all the damaging effects of vaccines.
Well, and it's so interesting that you say that because vaccination came after homeopathy. And so that term, and there's only two places in allopathic medicine where they do that, copy homeopathic law, and vaccination's one of them. Ritalin, Strattera, drugs specifically for children that are suffering ADHD or ADH or ADD is how it used to be termed. And so they actually, that's the time when they actually mimic similar suffering, which comes from the Greek. So again, want to be really clear that these terms are actually quite ancient, and medicine, traditional or what people term alternative. Actually, alternative medicine's been around a lot longer than allopathic medicine has. So homeopathy, that term itself, actually comes from the Greek, meaning similar suffering. So disease in the body forms an energetic pattern which skews natural health. And in order to cure that disease by law, you have to actually match the energetic pattern with the correct frequency. So we have about 4,000 homeopathic remedies that do that, whereas vaccines are more preventative, and maybe we'll get into the difference between immunization and vaccination. I'm not sure.
Okay, awesome. And so tell me, how does homeopathy heal a person from a mental, emotional, physical, and energetic level?
Yes, great question. Big question. So homeopathy doesn't actually heal. And you'll even get this with homeopaths, that they do think that homeopathy heals. It actually doesn't. And I'll tell you why. The life force simply returns to its natural healthy state after the blockage has been removed. So perhaps think about like this. It's like after some construction on a highway is done, you remove the barricade and then the traffic flows uninhibited back the way it originally was, or the way it's intended. You have a bothersome set of symptoms, for example, and you tell me what they are, say, let's say lower back issues. And then I look them up in a big book called a repertory. Say your symptoms are worse from bending over, and then it's worse on your left side. Say it's been troubling you since the death of a loved one. And once I have a list of the possibly matching homeopathic remedies, I'll cross-reference them in another big book called the Materia Medica. To ensure that there's a match. In this case, the chief remedy would be natrum muriaticum, which actually is common table salt. And this is where the materialists look, oh my gosh, it's just a placebo, or, and we have, 80 countries using homeopathic remedies, millions of people over the last 250 years. So I don't know if that's a placebo. I guess everybody's wrong. Yeah, I'm looking for your state of mind really to overlap what has happened, let's say, since that death in the family that has caused the lower back issues, which is the seat for grief. I'll give remedies then, ship that to you, ship that to my patients. internationally, and we're able to kind of use it as a heat-seeking missile to hit that mark, both on the level of the mental, the grief aspect, but also the physical manifestation in the lower back. And it's kind of like the artificial disease that I send in, which is the potentized table salt, hits that energetic pattern of the pain in the lower back and is able really literally to cancel them both out. And when they're canceled out, yes, the symptoms generally lift. And then you can use energy work, cranial sacral, chiropractic, Bowen massage therapy, acupressure to help with the further integration as the body really starts to adopt a different energetic pattern back into health again.
Interesting. So first you take it apart and then it comes back together.
Well, you remove the blockage, which is the actual disease. So you are actually annihilating in the most gentle way imaginable. Sometimes I say to patients, it's a bit like a wolf in sheep's clothing, and it comes in the middle of the night, annihilates that actual disease, and then the body goes, oh, wow, okay. So now I'm back to status quo, homeostasis. Now I can flow in the way I'm supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, yes, I can attest to that. How does homeopathy differ then from allopathic medicine? You touched a little bit on that, but if you could just go a little deeper into it.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that homeopathy and the word allopathy were both coined by Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, the founder of Heilkunst principles in homeopathy. So homeopathy follows strict principles, as mentioned, following the law of cure, like cures like. So allopathy actually also comes from a term derived from the Greek, coined by Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, and literally means other suffering. So other indicates suppression or palliation. And again, this is not good and bad. It's just that you need to define what principle is appropriate for the circumstances. So my daughter, who I just saw on the weekend, is studying to be an ENT, and she was talking about different drugs that she'll be allowed to use when she's in an emergency situation, when somebody's in extreme pain. That's not the right jurisdiction for homeopathy. So allopathy is at the time when somebody is in extreme pain, you want to use painkillers, especially if you have to put somebody underneath general anesthetic. That's not the time to use homeopathic principles. So yeah, it's really important that we define what is the appropriate jurisdiction. So that is why when you are using a drug, for example, it's not being prescribed homeopathically, but antipathically. And this is why you end up having side effects. And in effect, you now have a new kind of secondary disease in addition to the original disease you came in with. And this is called iatrogenesis. Now, both the iatrogenic disease and the natural disease have to be dealt with separately. So somebody's gone through surgery, emergency surgery, then afterwards we can remove those insults or blockages, because some people will tell you, I've never been well since, Allie, since I had that surgery. So, or the birth control pill, for example, or other iatrogenic insults. And so, like I said, antipathic prescribing is necessary, like if you burn yourself, or, you don't want it spreading, especially if it's a third-degree burn. You don't want that burn spreading further to the tissue. So you will use cold water or drugs, medication, alcohol baths to stop it from furthering. But yeah, the Benadryl, for example, is necessary if somebody's having an anaphylactic episode. But yeah, you want to remove that insult afterwards so that the body doesn't remember or record those drugs, up to 30, 60 years afterwards.
Yeah. Interesting. I can't believe just how intricate it is, and yet how beneficial it has been for me as well.
Sister.
What conditions can be treated with homeopathy?
That's a great question. Really, any conditions. So, It will answer to the law of similars. You name it, we've treated it in the last 18 years. I specialize more in women's health issues, so more specifically emotional connections to one's physical suffering. My husband, sorry, works more in family medicine. He'll specialize more in comprehensive and natural fertility protocols. He
Mhm.
also uses something called core bioresonance feedback, which is kind of like having an oracle to suss out difficult cases. We've just actually treated a fellow in Mexico who has reversed 4-stage cancer. Um, that it just it depends, really. I treated a case successfully of hemorrhoids, last week. It just everything in between, and as long as it's chronic, that's really our area of specialization. We've reversed many, many cases of autism. We had 2 new testimonials from patients just last week in autism.
Mm.
So yeah, you name it.
Fantastic. So what roles does a homeopathic doctor play in a person's healing recovery? Because I know for me, you've been a coach, therapist, nutritionist, doctor, naturopath, like all of the above in one. So how do you function as a practitioner?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I never really expected this going into this system of medicine. It was defined very clearly through our medical training that we are alive, really, and operating in 3 jurisdictions. The first
Mhm.
one being a natural therapist, which would be very familiar to you if you've seen a naturopathic doctor. So
Mhm.
science-based typologies like eat right for your type, exercise, supplementation, water intake, endocrine balancing, detoxification, heavy metal chelation, geopathic diseases like power lines, molds, chemtrails, those kinds of things. That's one jurisdiction. The second one is the actual homeopathic medicine for current issues, but also sequential timeline issues. That's how we really get back to your chronic miasms, which are the root causes of chronic disease. So we do it a little bit like a geological dig. So these gifts that get passed down from one generation to the next really are living in your DNA coding. And if you produce enough stress or trauma in your life, you'll start to invite those 8 genetic miasms up for your not so viewing pleasure. So that's the second jurisdiction to resolve genetic and timeline trauma. The
Mhm.
third jurisdiction we call therapeutic education, which looks a lot more like coaching, spiritual midwifery, or counseling. And that
Mhm.
really is to help with the preventing the reinfection. It also is the root cause for what we call ideogenic diseases, and they are really can kind of tell the spiritual flavoring or the theme of people's traumas or their genetic miasms really speak to a state of mind of cancer, for example, or insidious self-destructive tendencies, or I'm not enough. That's a big one, especially for the women we serve in this day and age.
Mhm. Now, what types of remedies or, I know they're not called medications, but what would you prescribe to a client, for
Yeah.
example?
And if you look back in the Materia Medica written by Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, its founder, he does call them drugs. He was an allopath, so that's sometimes difficult if you see that word listed describing a homeopathic remedy as a drug. So yeah, we try to distinguish them more, I would say, modern day from allopathic or chemical science. So we will prescribe all of them in an interview with a patient, which we'll get to in a minute. Patients will generally receive dietary counseling, homeopathic remedies, lifestyle suggestions, supplement support. And from the 90-minute initial, they get a whole kind of dynamic really a series of prescriptions, and these are then tweaked on a monthly basis as their health increases.
Yes. Okay. And usually the follow-up sessions are anywhere between 30 minutes to 45 minutes.
You got it. Mhm.
Okay. And how does homeopathy then complement allopathic medicine? Can it counteract or react negatively with allopathic medicine? Because I know that that was a concern for me at the very beginning.
Yes, and we will tell patients, stay on your allopathic meds because there is no contraindication with homeopathic remedies, thankfully. So we
Yeah.
just kind of get in there like we're working in their basement while they continue with the status quo. And while it takes a little bit longer if somebody's on drugs, we are still able to be efficacious. And the reason for that is because there is no biochemical meeting of the drugs or the herbs. Now, there are drug-herb interactions and contraindications, and in pharmacognosy and pharmacology, we have to actually study what those are because people come in using often herbs, sometimes drugs, and then wanting to integrate homeopathics as well. And so you have to be quite careful because with drugs and herbs, you're still in chemical science, and they will have contraindications and side effects. But the lovely thing about homeopathic medicine is it has no capacity to cause harm. And since its action is completely bioenergetic and not biochemical, it does not leave a chemical footprint that is contraindicated with any other medicine you could be using. And that's why it's safe to use with pregnant or breastfeeding mamas, infants, or the elderly. Emergency medicine and Heilkunst complement each other really well. That we can address chronic disease and also remove shocks and traumas related to surgery or accidents afterwards. And a Heilkunst physician has to study compendiums of pharmaceuticals and the herbal medicine. For example, licorice and heart medication are contraindicated and can cause actually a deadly reaction.
Awesome. That is so good to know. From your perspective as a homeopathy doctor, what are the biggest barriers to healing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you can usually tell quite quickly when you start working with somebody whether or not, and it's interesting because it's not, the medicine can never not work. Like the law of gravity, when you rolled out of bed this morning, you're like, oh, you didn't say, oh, darn, that law of gravity's not working today. Better turn the volume up. And it's the same thing with homeopathic cure, like gravity. It always works without fail. And I guess that the one barrier to healing really is an underutilization of Dr. Samuel Hahnemann's full system, which we term Heilkunst. So not drawing on all the necessary tools in the therapeutic toolkit demanded by a given case. So similarly, a patient may have reasons, usually unconscious, that'll cause them to sabotage. And this is an amazing thing. And as you already know, Gabby, people are very attached to the way that they got into their patterns of disease. I guess is the best way to say that. So feelings of the unlived life. I mean, I've had patients in the cancer matrix who have basically, told me to kind of bugger off, that, they're not really interested in stepping fully into their life or, solving the disease of resignation. They'll self-sabotage, really.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's almost like they give their power away. And it, yeah, it frustrates me a little bit, but each of us chooses how we want to move ahead with our life, and I find that every moment is an opportunity to move forward. You don't have to live in the past, but they tend to say, but the past is safer because at least I know what happened there.
Yeah. And it's somebody who lived in that matrix with an 1.5-inch tumor in my left breast. When somebody'd ask me how I was, I would, put my son up in front of me. We're fine today, kind of like, like really kind of, when I look back and think of how pathetic I used to be in that matrix, I can empathize, and sympathize, really. Yeah, I'm always like, come on, you can do it. Come back to the light. And sometimes you're right. That's the hardest thing as a practitioner is when you have the eyes to see, or you even have the knowledge because you've been there in the disease matrix and you know that there's a way out, that it actually isn't as hard as you think. That's where it gets frustrating, and we end up attached to our patient's outcome, and how quickly they get there. That's a challenge for the practitioner for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned something earlier this week when we talked about having the courage to change, having the courage to face the past and move forward. Not everybody's capable of doing that.
Yeah.
So it really does take the willingness to get out of stagnation and let things flow. So, okay. So my next question is, in your experience as a homeopathic doctor and knowing how energy affects our health, how much does our reluctance in dealing with a past trauma in our lives, because everybody has trauma in one way or another, but there's trauma somewhere in there. How does that affect our health?
Yeah, that's another great question. And it depends so much on that particular individual. And the number and nature of those traumas. I'm thinking of a very difficult case I have right now. Lots of cancer in that family line, lots of meds, worked in the allopathic realm for, almost 40 years. And the reluctance is really hard because they're like, well, should I see you, Allie, or should I go back to the allopathic doctor and get yet another drug to add on to the other sets of drugs I already have? Those are tough cases. And so again, it depends on the individual and the number and the nature of those traumas. Children and animals are the easiest patients for us to treat for sure. The lovely thing is that they're basically not very armored. And so armoring and karma will haunt a person with repeating emotional and physical patterns, almost like like the movie The Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, until you address them with the proper law and jurisdictions. So, yeah.
Okay, and that leads me to the next question, which is somewhat similar. What symptoms and or behaviors do you, including resistance to change, do you see in people with unresolved emotional issues, in particular women?
Yeah. Well, old beliefs, self-sabotage patterns occur because of karmic patterns and chronic diseases. So, for example, the genetic miasm syphilis, and yes, I know it's not pleasant to have to talk about sexually transmitted diseases coming down one's family line, but it doesn't mean they're not there. So it is the root cause for alcoholism, drug abuse, mental, emotional, sexual abuse, musculoskeletal conditions like MS, CP, and autism, for example, fibromyalgia, lupus, Lewy body disease. And they also have this self-sabotaging pattern at every turn. So, for example, they'll take a course and just about to write the final exam, and then they self-sabotage by just quitting suddenly for seemingly no provocation. So when we remove the 8 genetic miasms for both men and women, including this one, the roots of disease, thankfully aren't gender specific. The patterns of resistance tend to also lift, and you have somebody who will step more into their right work, their right relationship. They'll move geography sometimes as well, and you'll see a big shift on that account.
Awesome. Now, how does proper nutrition affect the mind in terms of mood, concentration, emotions, memory, energy? And what does proper nutrition mean from person to person? Because none of us are wired or made up the same way. Even though we may have very similar DNA makeup, we're really not the same individuals.
Great question. Yeah. And so just as somebody's treatment in medicine is very specific to them, regimen is also very, very important, both for physical and mental health. After all, our bodies are containers for housing our spirits for about 120 natural long years. So in our dynamic system of medicine, we apply proven scientific factors based on a for a person's individual typology. So, for example, a woman comes to see me and she's suffering issues related to autoimmune or adrenal fatigue. She's an O blood type and she has a variety of allopathic medications. So, she's encouraged to stay on those drugs, as mentioned before, until her allopathic physicians feel and she feel that the underlying cause is sufficiently addressed for her to come off them. We will work to detox the liver with homeopathic screens, supplements, and foods first. We'll then prescribe remedies and supplements to support her adrenals and provide a specific diet that quiets the noise of stress while engaging more the pituitary thyroid and the gonads to compensate in the interim. That protocol specifically comes from Dr. Abravanel, and we have adopted his protocols in that specific area for quite some time. And so after that, when a person is coming back to a greater state of grace and balance, and we're able to get the inflammation resolved in the autoimmune dysfunction, for specifically an O blood type, they do really well more with meat and vegetables, and we've got to get them away from coffee, dairy, chocolate, sugar, and carbs. Those are the biggest culprits for causing inflammation in that typology.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like the Atkins or paleo or keto approaches, people are finding randomly so successful when you actually know that O's and B blood types do very well with that, but not the A's or the ABs. Then you start to really kind of understand that the body requires that you respect those typologies. So we've been following and checking Dr. D'Adamo's research on Eat Right for Your Type through live blood analysis for the last 25 years. So that pretty much is it.
Okay. Are we really what we eat?
Yeah, that's part of it. It's actually interesting because a lot of people don't know what the spleen does. And Dr. Rudolf Steiner spoke to the fact that the spleen was a mediating organ between our physical body so that we can actually take foodstuffs in order to evolve our spiritual consciousness. So allopathy will tell you they don't know what that organ is for. But yeah, that's actually an interesting fact. So dynamic nutrition is part of who we are, but we are also what we think, and our thoughts are also informing our physiology, our health, our well-being. We can find rage trapped in segments of the body, for example. We're big in building up the human organism with probiotics, cultured, fermented foods. For example, Dr. Mercola sent a little of his homemade sauerkraut made from cabbage, salt, and water off to the lab after less than a week of its natural fermenting, and it had over 90 trillion good bacteria. So you can kind of see the I always say the body has two subway trains. You can load it on the side of life, or you can load it on the side of the death forces. It's kind of like you have a choice. So if you eat more minimally, loading up on super nutrients and fermented foods and living a fulfilling life, you may never aggravate those disease matrices that you've got downloaded with. So enjoy your kombucha, your water kefir, your natural yogurt, sauerkraut, and other foods. And yeah, look up on our website for more recipes at arcanum.ca if you like to learn more about fermented foods.
Yay. Now, can you give us an example of a testimonial story of a person who was perhaps even reluctant to try homeopathy and who was surprised about the results?
Oh, yeah, with pleasure. And yeah, there are many of them. And let me just quickly go over there right now. I'll give you a synopsis of one. She wrote, it's called Judy's Cure or a Full Recovery. She was somebody who was having an autoimmune implosion, and she couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. Just the doctors were sending her to one specialist after the other and basically not getting to any roots or root cause. and they were just, one injected dye, one MRI after another. And she's just like, for God's sake, somebody's got to know what's going on. And
Yeah.
so she came over to Arcanum, somebody had recommended, and she actually works in the field of health, allopathic health. And she was really struggling. She could not carry the laundry basket up the stairs from the basement anymore. And so her kids, her sons and her husband was doing this for her now. And so, yeah, a lump on the side of her neck, energy issues, just feeling really off. And so after a short couple of months, we had her back into a better state of grace. And in her testimonial on arcanum.ca, if you want to look at Judy's case, she lists there really that she attributes her complete turnaround to Heilkunst treatment in short order.
Awesome. How potent are homeopathic remedies? Are there precautions to take into consideration? I know that you spoke before, and you mentioned that there's no contraindications, but just what can somebody expect when they're taking them?
Yeah, great question. They are so potent, they can cure big diseases like heart disease. And again, you can read Catherine's case on our testimonial site. She was a little girl with an 8 millimeter hole in her heart, and we were actually treating her for reflux. And this was actually a side benefit when we got into the genetic miasm. Within 9 to 12 months, we were able to help her close the hole in her heart. Which was pretty amazing. So it's that powerful, but it is a very subtle bioenergy medicine. So you don't have the feeling on the physical level like that you are being drugged. So don't expect that. And so it's hard to look at the answer in material terms because the homeopathic remedy is slightly attenuated bioenergy, which is a technical way of saying that the remedy is correctly matched and slightly stronger to the disease, and it is extremely potent. But our material mindset is just like, how can that be that you're using such subtle energy? On the law of nature, like cures like, my mentor Stephen Decker says a remedy isn't a remedy until it remedies something, which is a good point. So in 225 years since their discovery, homeopathic remedies haven't caused an ounce of harm. And bioenergy doesn't have that capacity, but it's extremely potent. And you're not in the realm of chemical science. So mechanistic or materialistic empiricists will say that it's a placebo effect. But we know that's not true, that homeopathic remedies are being used in 80 countries by millions of people. It's the second most popular system of medicine worldwide. Our largest study actually comes from Cuba, where there were 1 million people that were actually getting infected by the leptospirosis bacteria after flooding every year. And so to cut to the chase, there were 70,000 people each year getting very sick, and some were even dying from this particular bacteria. Cuba chose homeopathic remedies because they're really cheap, $3.94, and you can actually, cure an entire country of a particular disease strain because you can actually graft it energetically. So this is what Cuba did, and not one case the following year. And again, go on to arcanum.ca, do a search on Cuba, and you'll find that study with all the references.
Awesome. Now, what can a person expect after taking a remedy? What happens?
Yes, that's a great question. So what I love to do is quote Dr. Samuel Hahnemann in the face of this question, because he does the best job of describing exactly what should happen. So Aphorism 9 in his book, The Medical Organon, of the medical art is really what it's called. In the healthy human state, the spirit-like living power, known as autocracy, enlivening the material body or organism as dynamis, holds sway unrestrictedly and keeps all of its parts in admirable, harmonious, and vital operation in both feelings and functions, so that our indwelling rational spirit can freely avail itself of this living, healthy instrument for the higher purposes of our existence. So
Hmm.
after you take a remedy and you achieve a state of cure, you can hear angels. No, I'm just joking. But basically, he says that on the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual level, you should feel free to be able to avail yourself of what you feel you are ordained to be.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, nothing short of that. So we're really programmed to think as long as we don't have symptoms, then we're whole or we're healthy. And that's actually not true. Um, that we should actually be free on all levels of our organism. And that's really what curative medicine is about. And there should be no shortfall.
Right. And how soon can people expect to see results from homeopathic treatment?
Yeah, this is a fun question for sure. We can do broadcasts. Again, you know this in the spiritual realm, and hopefully the people following you will also have the same level of knowledge, is that we know even from a prayer or from meditation that
Yeah.
it's instantaneous. And it's the same thing. I've broadcast a remedy of belladonna 10M for a feverish child in South Africa, and I've been told by the parent that within 10 minutes that babe is, sleeping soundly. Um, and the red cheek and the pain has completely disappeared.
Hmm.
So crazy as that may be, it depends really on the individual and the prescriber. And technically, the initial action or the cure occurs within seconds of having taken that homeopathic remedy, while the healing aspect or counteraction can take several days or even weeks. One summer, I was the medic for a kids' camp in Quebec, Canada. And I don't often get to work in this jurisdiction in my practice. So it was awesome to see how quickly these kids resolved from their bee stings, their minor scrapes, their headaches,
Mhm.
emotional strife. Homesickness was something I was treating, and a number of fevers as well. So, in answer to your question, it kind of depends on the age of the patient, how labile, flexible, and healthy their life force is. But the actual cure, on the law of cure, like cures like, is instantaneous.
Awesome. And how long can a person expect to receive homeopathic treatment? How do you determine the length of treatment for a particular individual?
Yeah, the treatment plan is really discerned at the initial consultation, and it depends on how knee deep you're wading. And again, we're able to really discern what that is after we've had a chance to discern, what's the level of the pathology, how deep do the issues go, how long on their timeline before. So never been well since events on the timeline are pretty important, and how far down the timeline are those. So
Yeah.
generally, we see patients every 28 days for around 12 to 15 months of treatment on average. Folks seeking to simply prevent chronic illness are much easier to treat than those with full-blown allopathically diagnosed pathologies.
Okay. That's good to know too. And then walk us through an initial consultation and a typical session.
Yes. So our receptionist is awesome at getting people set up in our schedules, and she will have them fill out a 4-page intake form and complete their timeline of sequential shocks and traumas in chronological order. And this kind of serves as the backbone for their treatment plan. And the initial consult takes about 90 minutes to complete. Monthly follow-ups are more like, as you said, between 30, 45, or 60 minutes. And we'll
Mhm.
go through their health goals at the initial, current state of health, regimen, exercise, sleep, typical foods they eat, type of water, exposure to toxins, drugs, herbs they're taking, past surgeries, dental procedures. What have they got in their mouth, like in the way of amalgams? What have they had in their mouth before in the way of amalgams? Next, we assess their chief complaints, how long they've had them, the nature of their symptom pictures. Much of this line of questioning will then lead to regimen advice, drainage, and organ support remedies, for example, in their dropper bottles. After that, we'll assess their homeopathic constitution. This is so much fun. This is who they are in health, and much of this can be determined from their likes, desires, predispositions as a kid. Their constitutional remedy is included in their emotional support dropper remedies, and they'll receive this in a separate dropper bottle after the initial consultation. The next line of questioning has to do with their family's health history, back to parents, grandparents on both sides, and this forms the basis for the root cause of the chronic diseases, and we will then decide whether to lap away at these issues if they're already presenting, also in a dropper bottle. The last aspect has to do with their first timeline event. This is the most recent trauma going back in time to one's birth. Folks are sometimes concerned about the length of time that this process can take. However, many events are similar in nature and can be grouped together. So purely physical events as opposed to emotional can often be treated in 2-week spans of time. And so we can move more quickly that way.
Okay. And who is your ideal client? And what do you take? Do you take a client that asks for, or any client that asks for help?
Yes, typically. Now, we have 3 physicians at Arcanum Holistic Clinic, and we are in the throes of hiring 2 more. And so it depends on resonance, really.
Mhm.
My ideal client is well-educated, open, flexible, and deeply curious. 80% of our clients are women. The individual is self-respecting and has always suspected that what mainstream medicine offers isn't wholly resonant for prevention of illness for herself and her family. Uh,
Mhm.
we take every client that approaches us, and we'll partner them with the best Heilkunst physician in our growing team to ensure resonance in their working relationship.
Awesome. And what are your expectations from a client before you decide to work with them?
Yeah. We expect them to complete the paperwork we send, to be open, to be curious. Many folks coming to us have read many of our blog articles or the free books that are available on our website. Excitement is not a prerequisite, but folks will often tell us that they're really excited to get started, that they're wanting to see where this takes them.
Awesome. And can clients see you or meet with you virtually, or do they have to come in person to see you?
Yep, we used to have offices in person in Canada, but now we offer our services solely virtually,
Awesome.
worldwide. So we have patients in Australia, Europe, all over Canada, the United States, Mexico. And so, yeah, we've been working and serving patients just so that we can serve more people internationally for the last 5 years. And it's worked great by Skype, distance, FaceTime, Google Hangouts, or phone.
Awesome. So I was going to ask you if somebody wanted to see a homeopathic doctor in person, how do they find one? But if you offer the services online, it really doesn't matter.
No,
Um,
no.
yeah.
And people will tell us that at first they're a bit reluctant, but
Mm,
when you are working with somebody by Skype, or it feels like we're there, and the advantage is that you actually get to be in your pajamas. If you are not feeling well, like if you're calling in and you just like, oh my gosh, there's a snowstorm out and my child has a fever, and I'm just still, I haven't gotten breakfast yet for anybody, like these are the times when people really appreciate us working online because we can be in their living room, in 5 minutes.
yeah. And you can do them on the phone as well, right?
Totally. Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And can you give us one takeaway to help our viewers in their healing journey from a homeopathic perspective?
Yeah, with pleasure. Self-educate yourself. So, I've heard some patients come to us and go, my physician doesn't appreciate when I use Dr. Google. And I'm all over that. We're all over that. Dr. Google yourself silly. Find out as much as you possibly can. Make sure that your practitioner is accountable to you. Ask them what laws of nature they're operating on, and ask them for their credentials, what books, articles they've written, what their code of ethics is. what their treatment plan is for you. Don't just trade in, trial and error medicine for another modality. So don't allow yourself to be bullied by a false authority. Ask questions, and you are the authority over your physical, mental, and emotional well-being. So make sure that that practitioner is actually working for you, not the other way around.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because I just recently had a situation like that come up, where my gynecologist actually suggested that I have a uterine embolization. And she said, oh, Google it. And she set up an appointment for me to see the specialist. And when I Googled it, I contacted her office and canceled the appointment, because I said, why would anybody in their right mind have this procedure done?
Yeah.
They're literally placing plastic pellets in one of your arteries to block flow to the uterus. But there's a huge, well, for me, it's huge. It may not be, but if there's any chance at all that the embolism could go to another part of your body, such as the brain, the lungs, or the heart, why would I risk having that procedure done? And so I was grateful that she said, Google it, because it allowed me to say, no, I won't have that procedure done. So yeah. So how can people contact you to get more details about Heilkunst, homeopathy, and anything else that they may have?
Yes. Thank you for asking. The best place to follow us is Arcanum Holistic Clinic on Facebook. We're very active there. We're also on Instagram, Twitter, and now MeWe. All our contact details are there. I've also included our names, our credentials, and links to our newsletter, books on Amazon, and our accounts on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter in this transcript below. So find us at arcanum.ca. And any questions you have about this talk or otherwise, I'm happy to do my best to answer them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allie.
Oh, Gabby, it's such my pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I've enjoyed our interview so much.
Thank you. Thank you. We will be in touch soon, okay?
I look forward to that.
Okay.